Hello, and welcome back to Megawatts on Your Mind. This is Lighthief, and today we're discussing Spain. Not the entire country, though we could easily spend hours on Spanish culture, food and football, but specifically Spain's photovoltaic market, the comeback story of European solar. The market that went from boom to spectacular bust, to phoenix-like resurrection, and currently the hottest solar deployment market in Europe. Spain is adding 5 to 8 gigawatts of solar capacity annually as of 2023 to 2024. To put this in perspective, that's more than most European countries have installed in total. Spain's installed solar capacity has grown from roughly 5 gigawatts in 2018 to over 25 gigawatts in 2024. This explosive growth makes Spain the fastest growing large solar market in Europe and one of the most dynamic solar markets globally. But Spain's solar story isn't simple triumphalism. It's a cautionary tale about policy mistakes, a demonstration of market resilience, and currently a case study in what happens when excellent resources meet favourable economics and relatively supportive policy. Spain also illustrates the challenges of very rapid deployment, grid constraints, permitting bottlenecks, merchant market cannibalization, and the question of whether this boom is sustainable or heading for another correction. From an investment and development perspective, Spain is simultaneously Europe's most attractive and most concerning solar market. Attractive because the volumes are enormous, the solar resource is outstanding. Project economics often work even without subsidies, and the pipeline extends to gigawatts of future capacity. Concerning because returns are compressing dramatically due to competition. Merchant market exposure creates revenue risk. Grid curtailment is increasing, and there's always the ghost of Spain's previous policy disasters creating underlying investor nervousness. Today, we're going to explore Spain's solar market comprehensively. We'll discuss the history, the feed-in tariff boom, the retroactive cuts, the long winter of minimal deployment. We'll examine the current utility-scale market, what's driving the boom, who's building, what the economics look like, what challenges exist. We'll look at the residential and commercial segments, which are also experiencing rapid growth through self-consumption. And we'll discuss the future, where Spain is heading, whether current deployment is sustainable, what role storage will play, and what lessons Spain's experience offers for other markets. At Lighthief, we work in the Spanish market through partnerships and follow it closely because Spain often indicates where other southern European markets are heading. What happens in Spain today often predicts Italy, Portugal, and Greece 3 to 5 years later. Understanding Spain means understanding the future of solar in sunny Europe. This episode is for investors evaluating Spanish opportunities, for developers considering market entry, for anyone curious about what Europe's solar boom actually looks like on the ground, and for policymakers wondering what can go right and wrong with solar deployment incentives. Shall we begin? And perhaps acknowledge that in Spain, both the sunshine and the solar market are genuinely exceptional. Let's start with history, because understanding Spain's current solar boom requires understanding the spectacular boom and bust cycle that preceded it. Spain's first solar boom occurred 2007 to 2008, driven by extraordinarily generous feed-in tariffs introduced in 2007. These tariffs offered around 40 to 45 euro cents per kilowatt hour for solar electricity, guaranteed for 25 years. Given that wholesale electricity prices were perhaps 5 to 8 cents and solar costs were declining rapidly, these tariffs were extremely profitable. The result was predictable. Deployment exploded. Spain added 2.7 gigawatts of solar in 2008 alone. This was more than the entire world had installed, cumulatively just a few years earlier. Developers, investors, and opportunists rushed to build projects before the tariffs inevitably decreased. International solar companies flooded into Spain. Financing was readily available. It was a gold rush. But the program was financially unsustainable. The tariffs were funded through electricity bills. All Spanish consumers paid a surcharge to support renewables. As solar deployment exploded, the cost burden became enormous. The tariff deficit, the gap between support costs and surcharge revenue, ballooned to billions of euros. Something had to change. The Spanish government's response was brutal and, in the view of many investors, betrayed reasonable expectations. Starting in 2010 and continuing through 2013, the government implemented retroactive cuts to feed in tariffs, including for already operating projects. Not just reducing tariffs for new projects, which is normal and expected, but actually cutting the guaranteed payments for existing projects that had been financed based on different assumptions. The cuts were substantial. Some projects saw revenues reduced by 20 to 30% or more. Many projects that were financially viable under original tariffs became marginally profitable or unprofitable under new terms. Some project owners faced bankruptcy. International investors lost billions. The Spanish government faced dozens of arbitration cases at international investment tribunals, many of which Spain eventually lost, requiring compensation payments. The impact on Spain's solar industry was catastrophic. Deployment collapsed from gigawatts annually to essentially zero. International developers fled the market. Spanish solar companies went bankrupt. Financing dried up completely. No bank would finance Spanish solar after the government demonstrated willingness to retroactively change terms. Spain became a cautionary tale, frequently mentioned whenever discussing policy risk and regulatory stability. This solar winter lasted roughly 2013 to 2018. During these years, Spanish solar deployment was minimal, perhaps 100 to 300 megawatts annually, mostly small projects not dependent on feed-in tariffs. The excellent solar resource sat largely unused. Spain's renewable energy progress stalled. What changed? Several factors enabled Spain's solar resurrection starting around 2018 to 2019. First, solar costs declined dramatically. Module prices fell by 70 to 80% from 2010 to 2018. Installation costs followed. By 2018, solar in Spain could generate electricity for 3 to 4 euro cents per kilowatt hour without subsidies, competitive with or cheaper than wholesale electricity prices. The fundamental economics shifted from requiring generous subsidies to potentially working as merchant projects. Second, Spain implemented new auction mechanisms. The renewable energy auction starting in 2016 to 2017 allocated capacity at prices determined by competitive bidding rather than fixed tariffs. These auctions attracted cautious re-entry from developers. Importantly, the auction contracts were structured differently from the disastrous feed-in tariffs, providing fixed payments for energy produced, rather than all-inclusive tariffs, reducing government exposure. Third, the regulatory framework for merchant and corporate PPA projects improved. Spain clarified rules around self-consumption, removed bureaucratic obstacles to merchant projects, and created frameworks for corporate power purchase agreements. This enabled projects to proceed without government support, eliminating the policy risk that had destroyed investor confidence. Fourth, electricity prices increased. Spanish wholesale electricity prices rose from around 4 to 5 euro cents per kilowatt hour in 2015 to 2017 to 5 to 7 cents in 2018 to 2019, and then dramatically higher in 2021 to 2022 due to gas price increases. Higher electricity prices improved merchant solar economics substantially. Fifth, international investor interest returned cautiously. While many investors who were burned wouldn't return, New investors without previous Spain exposure evaluated the market based on current economics rather than historical policy failures. Spanish solar looked attractive if you ignored history and focused on forward-looking fundamentals. The deployment acceleration was dramatic. From roughly 5 gigawatts total installed capacity in 2018, Spain added approximately 2019, 4 gigawatts, 2020, 3 gigawatts, 2021, 4 gigawatts, 2022, 6 gigawatts, 2023, 6 to 8 gigawatts. By 2024, Spain had over 25 gigawatts of solar installed and was adding capacity faster than any other European country. The transformation from solar wasteland to solar powerhouse occurred in just 5 years. The lesson from Spain's history is sobering. Policy stability matters enormously. Retroactive changes destroy investor confidence for years or decades. Spain's feed-in tariff disaster cost the country roughly a decade of renewable energy progress and billions in legal settlements. But Spain also demonstrates that excellent resources and favourable economics can eventually overcome even spectacular policy failures if governments learn from mistakes and create better frameworks. Now let's examine Spain's current utility-scale solar market, where the action is concentrated and the numbers are impressive. The scale is extraordinary. Spain has hundreds of utility-scale solar farms in operation, dozens under construction at any moment, and gigawatts in development pipeline. Projects range from 5 megawatts to over 500 megawatts, with typical projects perhaps 50 to 150 megawatts. Walk through rural Spain in Castilla-La Mancha, Andalusia, Extremadura, or Aragon, and you'll see solar farms extending to the horizon. The geographic distribution reflects solar resource quality and land availability. Andalusia, in the south, has the best solar resource in Spain, irradiation exceeding 1,800 to 2,000 kilowatt-hours per square metre annually. Extremadura and Castilla-La Mancha have excellent resources and abundant inexpensive land. Aragon and Catalonia in the northeast have good resources and proximity to French interconnectors. Even northern Spain, with more modest resources, is seeing solar development. The development model varies. Some projects proceed through government auctions. The REER auctions allocate capacity at competitively bid prices, providing revenue certainty through contracts for difference mechanisms. Auction prices have fallen dramatically. Early auctions achieved 3 to 4 euro cents per kilowatt hour. Recent auctions were even lower. These auction projects have bankable revenue from government contracts, making financing straightforward. Other projects are merchant, selling electricity directly into wholesale markets without government support. Merchant projects bet on wholesale prices exceeding production costs. When prices are favourable, merchant projects generate excellent returns. When prices are low or curtailment is high, returns suffer. This merchant exposure creates risk, but allows faster development without waiting for auction allocations. Increasingly common are corporate PPA projects. Large electricity consumers, tech companies, manufacturers, retailers sign long-term power purchase agreements directly with solar developers. These PPAs provide revenue certainty without government involvement, assuming the corporate off-taker remains creditworthy. Corporate PPAs have enabled substantial Spanish solar deployment outside auction mechanisms. The project economics are generally favourable but compressing. Development costs for Spanish utility-scale solar are roughly 400 to 600 euros per kilowatt installed capacity, among the lowest in Europe due to excellent resource, favourable terrain and competitive construction market. Projects typically achieve capacity factors of 22 to 28%, depending on location and tracking systems. At these costs and production levels, projects generating electricity for 2.5 to 3.5 euro cents per kilowatt hour are feasible. If wholesale prices average 4 to 6 cents, or if PPAs lock in similar prices, the economics work. But margins are thin. There's limited room for cost increases, production shortfalls, or price decreases before profitability disappears. The competitive intensity is extraordinary. Every significant international solar developer operates in Spain. Iberdrola, Endesa, Naturgy domestically, Enel, EDP, Statkraft from elsewhere in Europe, Chinese developers, financial investors building portfolios. The competition for sites, grid connections and off-takers is intense. This competition drives down returns. Auction prices barely cover costs for many developers. Merchant projects face cannibalization. When many solar farms produce simultaneously, wholesale prices collapse during sunny hours. Corporate PPAs are negotiated hard by sophisticated buyers. Developers accept minimal returns, hoping to achieve scale and operational excellence. Grid connection is becoming a serious constraint. Spain's grid infrastructure was designed for different generation patterns. Large thermal plants in specific locations, not distributed solar across vast areas. The transmission network needs massive reinforcement to accommodate planned solar capacity. Grid connection requests vastly exceed available capacity in many regions. The queue for grid connection contains over 100 gigawatts of renewable projects, far more than can realistically be built or connected. Developers submit speculative applications hoping to secure connection rights, then abandon projects if economics don't work. This creates administrative burden and uncertainty about which projects will actually proceed. Grid curtailment is increasing. When solar production exceeds local consumption and transmission capacity, grid operators curtail generation, forcing farms to reduce output. Curtailment was minimal a few years ago, but is growing, particularly in regions with high solar concentration. This reduces revenue and project returns. Permitting remains challenging despite improvements. Environmental assessments, archaeological surveys, aviation authority approvals, local permits all take time and create uncertainty. Some regions are more efficient than others. Permitting timelines of 1 to 3 years are typical, limiting deployment speed. Land acquisition or leasing requires navigation of Spain's fragmented land ownership and agricultural dynamics. Rural landowners in depopulated areas often welcome solar farm income, but negotiations can be complex. Some areas face community opposition, though generally less than wind projects. From an O&M perspective, Spanish utility-scale solar requires professional capabilities to maximize performance. The intense competition means small performance differences significantly affect relative returns. Soiling from dust in dry regions requires optimized cleaning strategies. Vegetation management in areas with seasonal growth. Equipment maintenance in hot environments accelerating aging. And the practical implications for investors and developers. Spanish utility-scale solar offers enormous volume opportunity, but compressed margins. Returns are modest, perhaps 6 to 8% equity returns for well-executed projects, lower for competitive auction projects. But scale can compensate for thin margins. The market strongly favours developers with low costs, operational excellence and scale. The days of easy money are over. Success requires professional execution, efficient construction, optimized operations, and portfolio approach to diversify risk. Merchant projects require sophisticated risk management and realistic scenarios for price cannibalization and curtailment. Corporate PPAs require strong origination capabilities and credit analysis. Grid connection strategy is critical. Understanding where capacity exists, securing connection rights early, having realistic expectations about timing, all essential for project success. From Lighthief's perspective, working with Spanish partners, Spain is exciting but demanding. The volumes are real, the solar resource is outstanding, but the competition is fierce, and execution must be excellent. It's not a market for casual participants. Let's shift to the residential and commercial solar segment in Spain, which is experiencing its own remarkable growth through self-consumption. The residential rooftop solar market in Spain has exploded since 2019. From minimal deployment, before 2019, Spain is now adding 2 to 3 gigawatts of residential and small commercial solar annually. This represents hundreds of thousands of individual installations, rooftop systems on homes, businesses, agricultural buildings, and community installations. The driver is self-consumption economics. Spanish retail electricity prices for residential and commercial consumers are relatively high, 20 to 30 euro cents per kilowatt hour, depending on tariff and consumption patterns. Rooftop solar generates electricity for roughly 7 to 10 euro cents per kilowatt hour levelized cost. The savings are substantial and immediate. The regulatory framework improved dramatically. Prior to 2018, Spain had the infamous sun tax, a charge on self-consumed solar electricity that made residential solar economics poor. This absurd policy, unique to Spain, was widely criticised as protecting utility interests over consumer benefits and renewable energy goals. In 2018, the new government eliminated the sun tax and streamlined self-consumption regulations. The Royal Decree 244/2019 established clear frameworks for individual self-consumption, collective self-consumption, and surplus compensation. This regulatory clarity unleashed pent-up demand. The surplus compensation mechanism allows residential solar systems to receive credit for excess production fed into the grid. While not a full feed-in tariff, it provides value for surplus generation, improving project economics. The compensation is typically 4 to 6 euro cents per kilowatt hour. Not huge, but meaningful for offsetting consumption during other hours. Collective self-consumption is particularly innovative. Multiple consumers can share production from a single solar installation within a defined geographic area. This enables apartment buildings, business parks, or entire neighborhoods to deploy shared solar capacity. This model makes solar accessible to consumers who couldn't install individual systems. The financing ecosystem developed rapidly. Spanish and international banks offer consumer loans for residential solar with attractive terms. Some solar companies provide integrated financing. Leasing and power purchase agreement models exist, though less common than direct ownership. The installation industry scaled dramatically. Hundreds of solar installation companies operate across Spain, from large national integrators to small regional contractors. Quality varies significantly. Professional companies provide proper designs, quality installations, and warranty support. Some lower quality operators create problems that damage industry reputation. The residential system size typically ranges from 3 to 10 kilowatts for homes, depending on consumption and roof space. Commercial systems might be 20 to 500 kilowatts. Installation costs have declined to roughly 1,000 to 1,500 euros per kilowatt for residential, somewhat less for larger commercial systems. The payback periods are attractive, typically 5 to 8 years depending on system size, consumption patterns, electricity prices, and financing costs. In Spain's sunny climate, a well-designed residential system might generate electricity for 25 years after paying back initial investment in less than a decade. The economics are compelling. However, challenges exist. The installation quality varies, as mentioned. Some consumers experience problems with substandard equipment, poor installation workmanship, or inadequate documentation. Warranty enforcement can be difficult when small installers go out of business. Grid integration issues are emerging. In areas with high residential solar penetration, local distribution grids face reverse power flow and voltage issues during sunny midday hours. Grid operators are adapting, but infrastructure investments are needed in some areas. The storage integration for residential solar is developing, but not yet mainstream. Battery systems for solar self-consumption are becoming more affordable and attractive. Spain's regulatory framework allows battery storage without significant barriers. As battery costs decline, residential solar plus storage will likely grow substantially, reducing grid dependency and improving self-consumption ratios. The commercial segment, businesses installing rooftop or ground-mounted solar for self-consumption, is particularly robust. Spanish businesses face high electricity costs. Solar self-consumption directly reduces operating expenses. Payback periods of 4 to 6 years are common for commercial systems. Many businesses view solar as essentially risk-free investment, with better returns than many alternative uses of capital. Industrial facilities, warehouses, shopping centres, hotels, all are installing solar at scale. Some large commercial systems exceed 1 megawatt on a single facility. These approach utility scale in size, but serve on-site consumption rather than exporting to grid. The agricultural sector is substantial in Spain, and agricultural buildings offer excellent opportunities for solar self-consumption. Farms, wineries, food processing facilities, many have large buildings with suitable roofs and significant electricity consumption. Solar self-consumption improves agricultural economics while supporting rural income. The apartment building and multifamily segment is developing more slowly. Shared ownership, roof rights, and benefit distribution create complexity. But collective self-consumption frameworks are enabling some apartment buildings to deploy solar. This segment has substantial potential as regulatory frameworks mature and business models develop. From an investment perspective, the residential and commercial solar segment offers different dynamics than utility scale. Individual projects are small, but volumes are large. Returns can be attractive for efficient operators with scalable business models. Financing is accessible. The regulatory environment is relatively stable. However, success requires consumer-facing capabilities, sales, marketing, customer service, quality control at scale. This differs from utility-scale development skills. Companies succeeding in Spanish residential solar tend to be specialized rather than utility-scale developers diversifying. The practical outlook: Spanish residential and commercial solar will continue strong growth. The economics work without subsidies. The regulatory environment is supportive. Consumer awareness and acceptance are high. Battery storage integration will accelerate growth further by improving self-consumption ratios and energy independence. Spain's self-consumption revolution demonstrates that when economics and policy align, distributed solar deploys rapidly. Other European countries with high retail electricity prices and adequate solar resources should watch Spain's residential boom carefully. It's likely preview of their own markets. Right, let's discuss where Spanish solar is heading and whether the current deployment boom is sustainable or approaching another correction. The immediate future is clear: continued rapid deployment. Spain's National Energy and Climate Plan targets 39 gigawatts of solar by 2030, up from current 25 gigawatts. This requires adding roughly 2 to 3 gigawatts annually, actually less than recent deployment rates. The 2030 target will likely be exceeded unless major disruptions occur. But several questions affect the sustainability and characteristics of future deployment. First, the storage question. Spain's high solar penetration is creating increasing midday price suppression and curtailment. Solar generation during sunny hours vastly exceeds consumption, causing wholesale prices to collapse or go negative during peak solar production. This merchant cannibalization reduces solar project revenues and economics. Storage solves this problem by time-shifting production from low-price solar hours to high-price evening hours. Battery storage is economically viable in Spain increasingly. Costs have declined to roughly 150 to 250 euros per kilowatt hour. Projects can capture price spreads between midday lows and evening peaks, while also providing grid services. Spain is targeting 20 gigawatts of storage by 2030, up from current 1 to 2 gigawatts. This represents dramatic acceleration. Most new utility-scale solar projects are evaluating storage integration. Some projects are being built solar plus storage from the beginning. Existing projects are considering retrofitting storage. The regulatory framework for storage is developing. Spain has auction mechanisms including storage. The grid code, accommodations for storage are improving. The business models are maturing. Energy arbitrage, capacity payments, grid services. The pieces are falling into place for rapid storage deployment alongside solar. For investors and developers, solar plus storage is increasingly the default approach rather than solar only. The integrated economics work better than standalone solar-facing cannibalization. Storage moderates revenue volatility. Projects with storage are more attractive to long-term investors and off-takers. Second, the hybrid question. Combining solar with other technologies, particularly wind, is attractive in Spain. Solar produces primarily in summer and midday. Wind in Spain often produces more in winter and at different hours. The complementary profiles reduce system variability and improve capacity utilization. Spain is seeing increasing hybrid solar-wind projects, particularly in areas with good resources for both technologies. These projects share grid connections, reducing connection costs and improving utilization of limited grid capacity. They share infrastructure, access roads, control buildings, security. They provide more consistent production profiles attractive to corporate off-takers. The regulatory framework for hybrids is supportive. Spain's auction mechanisms allow hybrid projects. Grid connection policies accommodate multiple technologies at one connection point. The practical obstacles are manageable. Expect hybrid projects to represent increasing share of Spanish renewable deployment. Pure solar and pure wind will continue, but hybrids offer advantages that many developers are pursuing. Third, the grid question. Spain's transmission grid needs massive investment to accommodate planned renewable capacity. The government has announced multi-billion euro grid expansion plans, but planning, permitting, and construction of transmission infrastructure takes years or decades. Without grid reinforcement, solar deployment could be constrained by lack of connection capacity or by excessive curtailment, making projects uneconomic. The grid is arguably the binding constraint on Spain's solar growth beyond 40 to 50 gigawatts. The practical response from developers is focusing projects in areas with adequate grid capacity or planned reinforcements. Understanding grid infrastructure and investment plans is increasingly critical for site selection. Fourth, the land use question. Solar farms are land intensive. Spain has abundant land, but concentrated solar development in specific regions is creating local concerns about agricultural land conversion, environmental impacts, and landscape changes. Some communities are implementing restrictions on solar farm locations or densities. Agrivoltaics, combining solar generation with agricultural use, is growing in Spain. Elevated mounting systems allow grazing or crop cultivation below panels. This dual use addresses land use concerns while maintaining agricultural income. Expect increasing adoption of agrivoltaic approaches. Fifth, The merchant market sustainability question. With gigawatts of solar producing simultaneously, will merchant market economics remain viable? Or will cannibalization become so severe that merchant solar becomes uneconomic? The answer depends on several factors. Storage deployment helps by time-shifting production. Demand growth through electrification of transport and heating increases consumption. Grid interconnections with France and Portugal allow exports. Hydrogen production as demand sink for surplus solar. Industrial demand, response consuming cheap midday power. With these demand and flexibility mechanisms, Spain can probably absorb 50 to 60 gigawatts of solar or more without merchant economics completely collapsing. But returns will be modest and volatility high. Developers need realistic expectations about merchant revenue rather than extrapolating historical prices forward. Sixth, the policy stability question. Will Spain maintain supportive policies, or could another retroactive disaster occur? The ghost of feed-in tariff cuts haunts Spanish solar despite current boom. The current framework seems more sustainable. Auction mechanisms with limited government exposure. Merchant and corporate PPA, projects independent of government support. No repeat of the unsustainable tariff deficit that prompted previous cuts. But policy risk can never be fully eliminated. Investors understandably remain cautious. Spanish projects likely face somewhat higher risk premiums than comparable German or UK projects due to historical policy uncertainty. This affects cost of capital and returns. The practical outlook for Spanish solar is continued strong growth, but with evolving characteristics. Storage integration will accelerate. Hybrid projects will increase. Grid constraints will drive geographic selection. Land use will require more careful management. Merchant market cannibalization will compress returns. Policy framework will be watched carefully. Spain will likely exceed 50 gigawatts of solar by 2030. The trajectory towards 70 to 80 gigawatts by 2035 seems plausible if grid infrastructure keeps pace and storage deployment succeeds. Spain could become one of the most solar-intensive electricity systems globally. The lessons from Spain's solar boom are valuable for other markets. Excellent resources combined with favourable economics enable rapid deployment even without generous subsidies. But very rapid growth creates challenges. Grid constraints, cannibalization, land use tensions, requiring proactive management. And policy stability matters enormously for long-term investor confidence. So we've explored Spain's solar market comprehensively. The history from boom to bust to resurrection, the current utility-scale deployment boom, the residential and commercial self-consumption revolution, and the future trajectory with storage and hybrids. Key takeaways: Spain has transformed from European solar cautionary tale to solar powerhouse in just 5 years. Adding 5 to 8 gigawatts annually, Spain leads European solar deployment. Over 25 gigawatts installed, and growing rapidly toward likely 40 to 50 gigawatts by 2030. The utility-scale market is intensely competitive with compressed margins. Success requires excellent execution, low costs, and scale. Merchant exposure creates revenue risk, requiring sophisticated management. Grid connection is increasingly constrained. Residential and commercial solar is booming through self-consumption economics. Elimination of the sun tax and streamlined regulations unleashed pent-up demand. Hundreds of thousands of installations serve consumer and business demand with attractive payback periods. The future includes rapid storage integration to address cannibalization and curtailment, increasing hybrid solar wind projects, grid reinforcement as critical enabler and continued strong deployment with realistic expectations about returns. The historical lesson remains important. Spain's feed-in tariff disaster cost billions and delayed progress by a decade. Policy stability and sustainable support mechanisms matter enormously. Current frameworks seem more robust, but policy risk is never zero. For investors and developers, Spain offers enormous opportunity but requires realistic expectations. The volumes are real. The solar resource is exceptional, but easy money is gone. Success requires professional execution, operational excellence, and careful risk management. For other European markets, Spain provides important lessons. Excellent resources and favourable economics enable rapid deployment, but challenges emerge at scale: grid constraints, market cannibalization, land use tensions. Proactive planning for these challenges is essential. Spain's solar story is ultimately one of resilience and renewal. Despite spectacular policy failures, the market recovered based on fundamental strengths: outstanding solar resource, declining costs, high electricity prices, eventually improved policy frameworks. Spain demonstrates that solar economics can ultimately overcome even severe policy mistakes if governments learn lessons and create better frameworks. In future episodes, we'll continue exploring renewable energy markets, technologies, and operational realities across Europe and beyond. We'll provide practical insights from actual experience rather than promotional narratives. This is Lighthief, reminding you that Spain's solar boom is real, impressive, and continuing. But booms carry risks. Previous boom ended in disaster. Current boom seems more sustainable based on economics rather than unsustainable subsidies. But vigilance about policy, grid, and market developments remains essential. Until next time, may your Spanish solar projects secure grid connections, your merchant revenues exceed expectations despite cannibalization, your self-consumption systems satisfy customers with real savings, and your memories of previous boom-bust cycles keep expectations realistic. Because in Spain, both the opportunities and the risks are larger than in most European markets.